I was about to head out when I saw the following article that the German government has collapsed. The German government has collapsed. Now, not bragging, but I have pointed out that the German government and many of those governments in Europe were going to collapse. And it gives me the opportunity to say, down goes Scholz. Down goes Scholz. Now, this follows the French government in complete political chaos, but the German government has been political chaos for a bit. Scholz has been deeply unpopular, dare I say despised. If you think about it, think back for the moment. There was a political chaos that happened, I guess it was a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, where the German government, amongst itself, the group or the coalition that made up the German government, a question was asked, a budget shortfall, and the issue of paying for Ukraine came up. The Scholz government wanted to continue with the way they were going, and one of the other members pointed out, well, wait a minute, they're losing. Why are we going to continue to keep doing what we've always been doing? It's not going to change anything on the ground, in which case the government fell apart in that sense. Today, there was no confidence vote. No confidence vote held against Olaf Scholz. Scholz is a German chancellor up to this point. Scholz needed 396 to win, meaning in order for him to remain as the chancellor, he needed 396 votes to win. Scholz got a whopping 207 votes. 100, more than 100 less than what he needed, nearly 200 votes less than what he needed to win. That gives you a bit of a clue how deeply, deeply unpopular Olaf Scholz is as a German chancellor. You knew Scholz wasn't a problem when he turned around and was like, I'm trying to talk to Putin. I'm trying to talk to Putin. And he had been agitating all of a sudden for a phone call with Putin. Reasons, no clue. It wasn't like it was going to change anything on the ground in Germany. Then he turned around and started passing immigration reform. Basically, the pressure that he was getting from the AfD, for example, was enough to make Scholz try to do a course correction. But the reality of it is there was no course correction that could really fix the ills that were that Germany was dealing with. I would say the Scholz problems originated at a very specific point. At a very specific point. That point being this moment right here.
We'll now take a couple questions each. Reuters, Andrea, you got the first question.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Chancellor Scholz. Mr. President, I have wanted to ask you about this Nord Stream project that you've long opposed. You didn't mention it just now by name, nor did Chancellor Scholz. Did you receive assurances from Chancellor Scholz today that Germany will, in fact, pull the plug on this project if Russia invades Ukraine? And did you discuss what the definition of invasion could be? And then Chancellor Scholz, wenn ich Sie fragen darf,
if I may ask you, Chancellor Scholz, you said there was some strategic ambiguity that was needed in terms of sanctions. I just wanted to know whether the sanctions you are envisaging and the EU is working on, and the US as well, are already finished, finalized, or is there still work ongoing? And
also, dass Sie das nicht sagen wollen, was genau da drin ist.
You're not really saying what the details are. Is that just an excuse for Germany maybe to not support the SWIFT measures?
Let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then There will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly? Since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control.
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Schönen Dank für Ihr.
That was the moment. That was the moment. Chancellor Scholz is standing there getting cucked by the President of the United States. That is the look of a man being cucked on stage in front of the live studio audience and in front of his entire country by the President of the United States. Look at that face. That is the face of a man, no charisma, ridiculously humiliated in this moment, and humiliated in a way where the rest of his country can watch him forever in the history books, being cucked by the President of the United States. This is a humiliating moment for Scholz, because not only did the President of the United States effectively say that a pipeline that was German and Russian would be ended, the President effectively said, I'll do it. I'll do it. We'll stop it. And then pause to make it very clear that, yes, I just said I would stop the pipeline that in no way belongs to me. And you go to Scholz, and what does Scholz have to say about it? Pretty much nothing. That is a humiliating moment. In fact, that's humiliating on a few fronts. One, it's not Joe Biden's pipeline, and yet Joe Biden blew that pipeline up. Two, destroying that pipeline damaged Germany's ability to be Germany and to allow Europe to be Europe. One of the interesting articles that came out, what they would never say in Western media is the word Nord Stream pipeline. Meaning in the USA Today article, and you can look at many articles, but I picked this one. In the USA Today article that went over the details of this, at no point in this article is Nord Stream pipeline mentioned, despite the fact that Nord Stream pipeline devastated Germany's economy. Don't take my word for it. Germany's living standards plummeted after Russia invaded Ukraine, says economists. Now, it's not about Russia invading Ukraine. Let's be very clear. They just don't want to say the words Nord Stream pipeline, that Europe decided to pass sanctions, and those sanctions ended up decimating Europe, but Germany specifically. If you look down into this part, the energy shocks caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, again, it's not the invasion, it was the actions that Europe took after the invasion. There's a big distinction in those things. Russia continued to offer gas and oil and everything else. It was Europe that decided to kill it. And more specifically, from the standpoint of the pipeline being blown up, Germany didn't seem to make a big stink out of the fact that their energy sector had been decimated by an act of radical terrorism. If you want to ask me why Scholz just got a no confidence vote, yes, it's because of the German economy, but let's just be very clear that the thing that damaged the German economy was not being able to get energy at the rate that they were able to get it. And I'll just read this part. The energy shocks caused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine has led to the biggest collapse of German living standards since the Second World War, and a downturn in the economic output comparable to the 2008 financial crisis, a stark assessment has found. In a joint paper designed to undermine the depth of the economic crisis in Europe, erstwhile powerhouse, two former economic advisors to the German government have said that real wages in the country slumped further in 2022 than any time since 1950. A failure to protect German industry from the energy price spikes may turn the 2020s into a lost decade for Germany and further fuel the rise of the populist right, AFD. This was devastating, to put it mildly. It was devastating. But again, I want to nail that down. It wasn't the invasion proper. It was the response to the invasion, European policy, that ended up damaging Europe, and the destruction of the pipeline that ended up damaging Germany to an obscene degree, to the point where you had two things that were happening at once. One, Germany was taking this kind of environmental policy. Fair enough. They wanted to be green. No issue with that. And simultaneously, while taking environmental policy, also, you know what? We don't need that Russian oil that we're going to get at a really good rate. Okay, again, fair enough. You can do that. That has consequences. And one of the consequences is a decimation to the living standards. Germany was able to be Germany because it was able to get energy at a certain rate. The moment that you couldn't get it at that price point and you had to pay 5 times more than what you were paying for it prior, well, you can imagine what happens to industry in Germany. You can't necessarily function in the way that you were functioning prior. Prices, by definition, would have to go up just because you have to compensate for the fact that you're paying more in energy, and everything costs. If you want to build tires, if you want to build baby powder, if you want to build diapers, whatever you want to build, all of that stuff requires energy. And Germany was able to function, or for that matter, Europe as a whole was able to function with energy being a certain amount. They had their guard. Well, the moment that they started passing sanctions, and energy costs spiked, and the United States was like, pay us. We hated that pipeline. And we hated that pipeline because we wanted to break the connection between Germany and Russia in one sense, but also to make Europe more dependent upon us and the energy that we can produce in another sense. Europe was stupid enough to do it. Scholz was stupid enough to stand there and let the president of the United States effectively Bigfoot him and saying that they were going to damage, if Russia went through, Germany energy security. And by definition, the economic prosperity of the German Republic. My point is that that moment was the moment that Scholz was screwed right off the bat. Don't get me wrong, he let himself be screwed over in that way, but nevertheless, screwed he was. And again, don't take my word for it. Here's another one, Bloomberg. German is unraveling just when Europe needs it the most. I think this came out yesterday or the day before yesterday. Meaning, it is understood that Germany was deeply damaged by this. Angela Merkel pointed out in her autobiography that the U.S. seemed to take policy that damaged the U.S.'s allies, meaning Europe, that we didn't necessarily care all that much about whether or not the policies that we would take would hurt Europe, as long as it was in America's best interest. This is one of those examples of that. Angela Merkel, whatever anybody wants to think of her, seemed to, at the very least, have this idea of what was best for Germany. And I know the immigration is a secondary issue, but from the standpoint of Germany, she fought for that pipeline. She protected that pipeline. And the moment they handed it off to Scholz, up in smoke. Up in smoke. So, the German people, cold, angry, poor. In fact, in that Bloomberg piece, they point out that Germany, right here, the EU's largest economy is on a path to decline that threatens to become irreversible. This is what Bloomberg pointed out. It said estimates show that after 5 years of stagnation, the German economy is now 5% smaller than it could have been if the pre-pandemic growth trend had persisted. It even goes into pointing out that the decline in national competitiveness translates to a loss of 2,500 euros per household annually. So every household in Germany, on average, is 2,500 euros poorer as a direct result of the policies of the Scholz government and what the Scholz government allowed. What the Scholz government allowed. So, if you're a German citizen, you see your country getting you closer and closer to the brink of war. You see yourself getting poorer. You see more immigrants coming into the country. Well, what happens? You start to trend to the right. And to the right is AFD, which means the AFD puts more pressure on the political space, which is exactly why Scholz started acting in the way that Scholz was acting. But at that point, it was like too late. It's like Joe Biden waiting for the last year to be like, hey, maybe we should do something about immigration. It's not taken as serious. It's not taken as real per se. And so from the standpoint of an election, well, nobody's going to believe this new changeover that you've done. It was too little, too late. The same thing was true for Scholz. Too little, too late. I pointed out almost a year ago that these governments are going to collapse. And damn it, if these governments are not collapsing, and Europe is doing any and everything in its power to hold back the night. You can see their behavior in regards to the Romanian election, where they literally killed the election. I know they're going to blame that on the court, but fair enough, that court is getting pressure. Or at the very least, that court is under a system of thought. Let's say it that way, a system of thought. Even if they're not necessarily being pushed, they're definitely under a system of thought of what they consider to be an eligible candidate versus a non-eligible candidate. And the eligible candidate functions within the orthodoxy of the typical ruling party of Romania, despite the fact that the public wanted something else. The same thing is true with Georgia, where you get the government and the public choosing the Georgian Dream Party. This is who we want. And you get Zorbas saying, I'm not leaving, I'm not going anywhere. She just got voted out the other day. Let's see what happens going on here. If anything, she's been trying to foment an overthrow of the Georgian government, basically working against her own government, because again, she don't necessarily like the politics of the party that won, that the majority of Georgians chose. Georgia doesn't want to end up in a war, and it definitely doesn't necessarily want to be Europe's second front after what Europe ended up putting Ukraine through. So these countries are taking rational action as a direct result of what Europe is doing and what Europe is seemingly driving them into. And so when you get the Germans, where Scholz seemed to be radioactive at this point, a no confidence vote comes up, Scholz loses, the government collapses, and the president is going to have to make a decision to call new elections. Now, that decision is going to have to take place February, I believe, 21 days, right? So he has 21 days to decide. They're believing that the election is going to take place on February 23rd. And I'm saying decide, but up to this point, they believe that this is a done deal, that the president will most likely go through with this. It's almost like a formality at this point in regards to an election being called on February. So the expectation is February 23rd. It may be a little bit before that date, maybe a little after that date. I will nail that down when that date is defined. This is something that the article is pointing out, that most likely that is the date that this is going to take place on. But down goes Scholz. Down goes Scholz. Now, the AFD is less hostile in the sense of wanting to be in these wars. It's somewhat skeptical of NATO, definitely skeptical of immigrants. And from the standpoint of giving money to Ukraine and everything else, that most likely is going to be a fail. But I guess my point is this. From the standpoint of policy, Scholz has fundamentally damaged Germany. And when that pipeline blew up, he had little to nothing to say about it, despite the impact that it had on his own country. In fact, to make this even worse, you get Mark Rutte making this argument that people should be willing to take a hit to be prepared and get ready for war. So effectively, you know, your healthcare, your education, all of these good living situation that we have in Europe, yeah, you need to be willing to give that up.
Make our defenses much stronger and to preserve our way of life. I know spending more on defense means spending less on other priorities. But it is only a little less. On average, European countries easily spend up to a quarter of their national income on pensions, health and social security systems. We need a small fraction of that money to make our defenses much stronger and to preserve our way of life.
Preserve our way of life, my ass. You know what could have preserved your way of life? Like coming to some level of agreement in regards to the security architecture of Europe. Just that. Fulfilling the Minsk agreements. Just that. Allowing the Istanbul agreements to go through. Just that. Meaning there was one opportunity after the next for this not to necessarily get to the point of a war. But Europe didn't want to do that. They were following the U.S. lead, and they're following the U.S. lead to take a maximalist position on everything, ignoring the fact that when the Cuban Missile Crisis was taking place, the United States was willing to end the world in order to preserve the integrity of the United States. Situation reverse, it becomes Russia, and from their point of view, they believe that they're somehow superior. I don't quite know why, but they do. And in doing so, they don't necessarily want to make a deal. They want to necessarily make agreements. And any of the agreements that they did make, they were willing to completely blow off, not caring about Russia's security interests. Which, again, if you're talking about, you know, Timbuktu, okay, fair enough, you can pull that off. If you're talking about a military power, not so much. This was infinitely foreseeable that they were going to end up in this particular situation at loggerheads on this very specific issue, considering Ukraine has been the entry point by Western powers into the Soviet Union at one point, Russia at other points, meaning this was always going to be a fail. This was incompetence on a radical fucking level that these European leaders have effectively got themselves into. So I don't feel sorry for Germany in this case. These guys have, I feel sorry for the German population on some level, but the leadership is fundamentally incompetent. You let a man who is literally not in his right mind enough to run for office to humiliate you like this. Joe Biden can't even run. He is not in his right mind to stand trial, let alone run for the presidency. And yet you let him sit here and Bigfoot you like this in front of your own German population, who I would imagine has watched this clip just as much as I have. It is humiliating. Scholz deserved that no confidence vote. And fact of the matter is, when that election comes up, Scholz deserves to lose every bit as much as he did in this no confidence vote. He has been an utter and complete failure to the German interests. When they're talking about countries like Romania, or for that matter, countries like Georgia, those people are not Russian-backed or Russian-affiliated. They're just nationalists. And in the context of nationalists, they're thinking to themselves, what is in the best interest of my state? Oh, I know, not being pushed into a war in Europe. It's not in our best interest. It's not in our country's best interest. So I am against it. I am saying that if Germany would have taken a position that was more like that, then they would have been far better off. And they wouldn't have been paying 5 times more for energy as they are now. They wouldn't be deindustrializing, in this case, with many of those companies coming to the United States. And quality of life in regards to wages would be much higher. Scholz earned that no confidence vote. One policy after the next, whether he was pushed into it or not, it doesn't matter if you're pushed into it. Your responsibility is Germany. Scholz earned that no confidence vote. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I am going to say subscribe. Thanks all.